What's up, y'all? This is Masked Warrior back at it again with another video. And my third attempt doing this because my freaking recorder is acting not right today. I need to update it. But today we're gonna be finishing up Lord Blackwood and the Land of the Unclean. And happy 420, everyone! Yes, it's 420, and I have no weed. Only these things, these freaking 38 special cigars. I hope y'all are having a fantastic 420. Because I am currently quarantined with no weed, and I hate it. I hate having no weed, but oh well. But today, we're gonna watch this, relax, actually no, just because we can. Oh, sorry, I got distracted. Alright, let's start it up.
Stood in the same place as cities in our own, though none shared the same name. London was here called the city of Winston's stand, and Edo the city of David's triumph.
Also, before we continue on, I want to see, this is because, this is kind of important for the channel. I've been thinking about starting up my own, like, storytime videos, I guess. As you know how like people like Goblin and Xcode have like their storytime videos and whatnot. I'm gonna be trying that and as well. If you haven't heard of those, go look them up. They're freaking awesome. If you haven't heard of those channels, go look them up. Their stories are pretty good. But yeah. Let's continue on with the video.
Saw no national boundaries on the map, though there were many names indicating different regions. The United Lands of the Sun, Aphasia, the Land Bountiful. The only divisions indicated were between the Blessed Lands, colored green, and the Unfertile Lands, colored red. There were unfertile lands spread across the globe, though I found the distribution most uneven. In North America, I saw but 7, and in Europe, 4, while Africa had dozens, and almost the entirety of China was covered by them. I found that the Bible exists in this world, but it is a Bible very unlike our own. It is about 1,000 pages longer, and is divided into 3 sections, named the First, Second, and Third Testaments. The First and Second Testaments are similar to the Old and New Testaments of our Bible, but have been extensively rewritten. All references to God, the Lord, or the Father have been replaced with a simple reference to Him, and there is a greater emphasis on sin, uncleanliness, and purification than I recall ever learning in school. The Third Testament appears to have been written in the 17th century, and as I had not the time or inclination to read it in full, I referred to a history book about what is referred to in this world as the Second Coming. Prior to the year 1621 or so, I found, the history of this world had been much like our own, aside from certain linguistic and cultural details, and an indication that the widespread colonization of the Americas had begun several hundred years earlier. In that year, the being called Him made itself known to the people of the world, and nations worldwide proclaimed it to be their God. He provided them with great advances in technology and medicine, which were the impetus of the advanced civilization I now beheld. But war broke out across the world over the question of which nations were most worthy of His love. When He beheld the devastation that His children had wrought, He wept, and where His tears fell, those who tasted of them were purified of sin, and lost their inclination to fight. But those who refused to cease in strife, those who were consumed by sin and evil, their wickedness was magnified in His absence, and took form until it became the unclean, the giant abominations that to this day lurk in the unfertile lands. All life that the unclean encounter is destroyed utterly. Men and women, animals, even plants are all consumed by the creatures and vanish into thin air, leaving behind only the ichor of sin it discharges when it feeds. Agents of the church known as the Blessed Militia guard these lands and do constant battle to keep the unclean imprisoned within. In time, the United Lands of the Sun brought together the nations of the world under the rule of a theocracy governed by a man called the Most Holy Father. There were 10 ranks of the clergy, from the Most Holy Father himself to the Blessed Fathers at the bottom, whose hierarchy comprised not only the church, but the courts, the legislature, and the executive powers of government. The judicial system was not unlike English law, though it incorporated elements similar to the canon law of the Roman Church, and the clergy were exempt from its direct judgment, for only the Most Holy himself could pass judgment on them. The death penalty was unknown. Those who had committed great crimes were bathed in a compound called the tears, supposedly refined from his own weepings, and if they survived the trial, the urge to sin was cleansed from their mind. As luck would have it, one of the few unfertile lands in this country is located in the deserts 100 miles east of this city. On the maps, I spotted a railway line that draws dangerously close to this border. Interestingly enough, I noticed that almost every city had a rail line leading directly into the unfertile lands as well, but those were marked as for militia use only, and I deemed them inaccessible. Tomorrow I shall travel on the train that passes this border, and find a way to depart as close to the edge as possible, and determine whether I can smuggle myself into this forbidden land. I know not how much of the history I've read is true, and how much is hagiography concocted by the church, but soon I shall find out. January 14th, 1876. I am lucky to have escaped the events of the past few days with my life, but even now I may be doomed. My entry into the unfertile lands was uneventful. I was able to excuse myself stealthily from the train during a brief stop, and hiked but a few miles under the desert sun to the edge. The perimeter in this region was guarded only by a fence with prominent signage. Warning: unfertile lands, unclean within. Blessed militia only beyond this point. By order of the Regional High Father, City of St. Francis's Triumph. The Blessed Militia, I assumed, must have some means of tracking the unclean and preventing them from crossing the borders of this country. I, on the other hand, would have to rely on luck and providence. I could smell the unclean for hours before I spotted it. Nothing grows in this land, and there is no running water, nor so much as a buzzard in the sky, but the air hangs heavy with the undeniable stench of death, worse than the foulest Scottish abattoir, or the banks of the putrid Ganges. I could have been sick, but I steeled myself and pressed onward in the direction from which the stench seemed to be its strongest. I assembled and readied the destabilizing musket I had carried in my pack, a special model Mr. Moth had prepared especially for this expedition, and bringing to bear considerably more potential for atomic disassembly than the standard models. I spotted it after climbing a ridge and almost turned away and retreated right away. I had expected a creature the size of a man, or not much larger. The abomination I beheld was easily 500 feet long and dozens of feet tall. It was almost the shape of a man, but it had no legs. 2 arms that seemed to grow and shrink as they moved dragged a massive trunk across the desert sands, while a head with no face seemed to loll and stare at nothing in particular. Its skin, the tone of a white man's, was smooth and hairless across its entire body, and it made no sound as it seemed to crawl about aimlessly. A brown ichor seemed to ooze from it before quickly evaporating. It was no wonder the people of this world thought these things to be devils made flesh. Even with my heavy destabilizer at the ready, I was obviously ill-equipped to hunt a creature of this size. I observed for several hours as it seemed to crawl aimlessly in the same general area, with no particular direction or agenda, taking notes and making sketches. It was late in the afternoon when I determined I would have to turn around. A train bound in the opposite direction would pass by shortly after nightfall, and I intended to board it and return to the city. But luck was not with me. As I stood from my hiding spot upon the ridge, the unclean's head turned in my direction, and it stopped its incessant crawling about. Though it had no eyes or ears, it somehow knew I was there. And though it had no mouth, the abomination let out a blood-curdling moan that echoed for miles. One of the creature's giant arms stretched out in my direction, and it began to drag itself my way. I had no choice but to stand and fight. I raised my musket at the creature's featureless visage, took careful aim, and fired. The unclean was wholly unaffected as the bolt from my musket passed harmlessly through it and dissipated in the atmosphere. In seconds, it was before me, and I was sure I was about to die. The creature loomed above me, resting itself on its giant hands, as the face bore down upon me.
You know, this would actually make a great animated series. If somebody out there is good like animating and whatnot, and if somebody out there is like, it would be either a good animated series or heck, even a good movie, like short film or whatever. Do it. I'll take either one.
Before it could presumably devour me whole, I heard a massive report, and a giant shell struck the unclean in the face and exploded. I was showered with foul-smelling brown ichor as the beast's face was torn open, and though the wound seemed to seal itself quickly, more and more shells struck it in the face, the trunk, the arms. It stumbled, and I ran to avoid it falling on me, as men in dark-colored uniforms, decorated with symbols like those I had found in the disc in London, pounded it with artillery. It lurched at them, and one of the soldiers was devoured whole by the creature, its clothes and weapons falling to the ground as the man vanished. Soon it could take no more as the barrage continued, and it turned around and fled back into the desert. I retreated in the direction from which I had come to find a convoy of armored motor carriages armed with heavy cannons. I attempted to run, but in seconds the soldiers surrounded me and apprehended me in the name of the blessed militia. I was told I was lucky to be alive after attempting such a foolish pursuit, and that I would be put to the question by the court of blessed voices. My situation was compounded when one of the soldiers searched my pack and found one of my good luck charms, a small gold cross that had been given to me by the Patriarch of Alexandria during my exploits there in 1855. The soldiers immediately declared me a heretic, and some were of the opinion I should be shot then and there, or taken back for the unclean to devour. In either event, I was bound to steel cuffs and escorted to a prison cell, where I now await trial. They do not know I still have this journal, though if I am convicted of heresy and put to the tears, it may not long matter. January 16th, 1876. I was brought before the court of blessed voices yesterday. The scene I found myself in looked like a scene out of the Spanish Inquisition. 3 men in arcane robes beheld me from atop the judge's bench, while I stood in the dock guarded by the blessed militia. The senior judge advised me I had been accused of heresy and trespassing in the unfertile lands, and that I faced the tears, and demanded my plea. No lawyer had been provided of me, and I expected nothing resembling a fair trial if I contested the charges. Yet if I pled guilty, I would surely be put to the tears, and my mind torn apart by that mysterious concoction. Recalling that the laws of this land were similar to those of medieval England, and that no member of the priesthood might be tried by them, I took a gamble and insisted that I was a man of the cloth, and thereby was entitled to benefit of clergy, the ancient right of a holy man to avoid prosecution by proving his ability to read from the Bible. The judges were most skeptical of this proposition, even in this nation, the benefit of clergy was an outdated right, for many more people could read in these days than simply the priesthood. A reference to their legal texts, however, found that the right had never been disestablished. I was told I could attempt to exercise that benefit if I wished, but that it would then be up to the Most Holy Father himself to judge my fate, and he would be less forgiving than this court. I hoped for nothing less than to play for time, and I agreed. It was decided that I would be expected to read 3 verses. One of the strange Bibles of this world was placed before me and opened to the Third Testament, and I was asked to read a passage called Edward 7:22. As before, the strange lettering of this world's language made itself clear to me, and I read, "Be free of sin, therefore, as he and his angels are free of sin. For wherever evil transpires in the hearts of men, the unclean walk among us." Next, the book was opened to the First Testament, and I was asked to read Psalm 23:4. It was most unlike the version I had learned in chapel many years ago, but I read it clear and true. "Though I walk in the land of the unclean, I will fear no evil, for you are always watching. Your voice and your sight protect me." I was surprised when the judge closed the book and proclaimed I would have to prove myself by reciting the 3rd verse from memory. I was challenged to recite Matthew 5:38-39 from the Second Testament. I knew well enough the verse in King James Bible, but I had no way of knowing how it might have been presented in this world, or even enough of their strange theology to guess. I felt doom creep upon me, and decided to do the best I could, and closed my eyes as I recited the verses I knew. "Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also." The judges did not at first respond to this reading. They retreated to their bench and discussed amongst themselves for a few moments, and one departed briefly, returning with a truly ancient book, which they examined while conferring further. I wondered if reciting the verse in its original form might have only confirmed their accusation of me, when my bonds were removed, and I was ordered to follow the chief judge to his chambers. Seated behind a magnificent desk of fine ebony, the chief judge informed me that I had correctly recited the verse in question as it had existed in the ancient Bible, before the Second Coming. Those old texts were forbidden to the public. Even the heretic sects made do with modern versions, and the only known copies in existence were in possession of the church fathers themselves, for their personal study. The book he had examined was the only ancient Bible in the entire city, and before today had not been removed from safekeeping for over 50 years. And yet, I knew its verses by heart. Therefore, he said, it was obvious that I was at the very least a holy father, one of the 3rd highest echelon of the clergy, who had traveled incognito to his land for some purpose. Though he had no power as a mere blessed voice to compel my obedience, he asked why I had come, and what I had been doing in the unfertile lands with a heretic's cross and a strange weapon that was useless against the unclean. An opportunity had been granted to me, and I chose to take advantage of it. I informed the blessed voice, a senior member of the church's scientific research division, conducting tests on the development of improved weapons for suppressing or even killing the unclean. I told him my destabilizing musket was the product of this project, and it had shown promise in tests against tissue samples, and I had been delegated to test it myself in the field. Unfortunately, it had not lived up to its promise, and further refinements would obviously be needed before it could live up to its full potential. The cross, I claimed, was merely a trophy I had taken from a heretic in the priesthood after I exposed his treason. To my surprise, the blessed voice did not question my account at all. So great the respect for and fear of authority is within this nation, I suspect, that the mere supposition that I was his superior was enough to put me...
I recognize that place. I think that's fan art from Metro 2033 or 2034. But I'm not completely sure. because I recognize the metro sign right up, right above that windshield, front windshield. Just saying. But it is very interesting so far.
Beyond reproach. By the end of our meeting, he had offered me access to a laboratory in the Blessed Militia's base at the edge of the unfertile zone. I accepted his proposition, and today I found myself examining a facility which makes the laboratory in my own estate look like a child's plaything. It is fully appointed with every instrument a man of science could want for, and several that I do not yet even understand the purpose of. There are full stocks of chemicals, as well as tissue samples acquired from the uncleen, samples of their ichorous discharge, and a variety of medical nutrients and fluids, including the mind-altering substance called the Lord's Tears. I have been given private quarters within the base, and the militiamen gave me a wide berth. I've noticed they avert their eyes as I pass them in the halls, and all conversation ceases when I enter a room. They believe I hold power over their very lives. For now, at least, I shall make no effort to disabuse them of this notion. It shall take me some time, but perhaps with this equipment and the samples provided me, I can learn enough of the nature of the uncleen to genuinely construct a weapon capable of causing true damage to them. If only Deeds were here, at least I would have a capable lab assistant. February 27th, 1876.
Oh, if you don't know who Deeds is in this series, he's another SCP. That's called the Butler's Handbill. Basically, whenever you ring the handbill, he'll appear out of nowhere, and you basically ask for like almost whatever you want. Like if you want a brick of weed, you can want weed or whatnot of the like a specific strain, like motor or breath or sour diesel or something like that. You could get it for you. That'd be awesome. And if only the SCP was real and I had it, I'd be ringing it. You appear out of nowhere, man. That'd be awesome. I'll be reacting to that SCP fairly soon. Just so you know. Alright, let's continue.
I have made a truly horrifying breakthrough in my research today. I do not even know if the most senior leaders of this world know the truth. Some of them must surely know, if a heretic from another world was able to figure it out so quickly. And they have gone to great lengths to hide it from the world in their life or religion. The beings called uncleen are not devils or beings of pure sin, but gross mutations of the human form itself.
Jesus.
The key is the tears. I know not what the true origin of that compound is, or from whence it comes, but it is more than a simple tool of mind control. When human flesh is exposed to a significant enough concentration, it changes. The bonds that hold the atoms together peel away, and it becomes mutable and elastic, folding around and absorbing all other life introduced to it. A single mutant becomes 2, and then 3, and 4, growing larger and larger, becoming less and less human in form, until it becomes uncleen.
I'm gonna pause right there for a second. That kind of reminds me of the SCP-610 video that I reacted to a while back. If you haven't watched that, go ahead and watch it. I'll leave a link in the description. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I wondered how these creatures first came to be created. Did the Church Fathers make weapons of them to unleash upon those renegade nations that refused to submit to their will? Perhaps they use them for that reason still. I had found numerous reports in the history books of cities and countrysides being attacked by uncleen, suddenly loosed from their unfertile lands, whenever sentiment in that land had turned against the church. Even now they continued to throw millions of people into the tears every year to better control them, some of them surely mutating as the result and becoming the basis of a new abomination. No wonder there were railways leading into the unfertile zones. It was necessary to dispose of the persons so changed. I wondered how many were sacrificed intentionally to make the unclean more powerful and more menacing as weapons of terror. I wondered what might happen if news of this horror became known to the people. How many more heretics would the elders throw in the tears? How many cities would they loose the unclean upon to suppress the threat to their power? How many uprisings could they manage? How many mutants could take form before the unclean became uncontrollable and society itself was brought to its knees? I shudder to think of it. But with this horror has come revelation. The unclean are born of using the tears to allow people to absorb others into themselves. What if a compound could be produced that weakened those bonds? I think I can develop a way to produce a variant of the tears that will counter the effect the original has had on these poor souls. I owe it to the people of this world to try. March 20th, 1876. Today is a day I shall remember the rest of my life. After weeks of research, I have produced my weapon, a serum which I have with no small amount of pride named Blackwood's Tears. I have tested it on tissue samples of the unclean and watched them dissolve before my very eyes. It took several days experimenting with one of the most sophisticated repeater rifles used by the militiamen of this world, but I have developed a custom rifle that fires syringes filled with Blackwood's Tears. Upon impact, the force should activate the plunging device and inject the serum directly into its target.
I'm sorry to keep pausing, guys, but I just got a random ass thought. Whenever he mentions when he mentioned this is the repeating rifle, I don't know why I always think of an AK-47 like design when it comes to a repeating rifle like that fires syringes. I have no idea why, I just do. Probably because AK-47 is one of my favorite weapons. Especially in like video games and shit.
I have produced several hundred rounds of serum and loaded them into magazines. If my calculations prove true, it should take only a few dozen to destroy one of the abominations. Yesterday, I spoke to a colonel of the militiamen who confirmed that the trains into the unfertile zones are used to carry people who the fathers have declared incurably sinful, though he did not know the true meaning of that infamous phrase. He said a highly purified vial of tears was contained on each train, which lured the unclean to it. Thus, the incurable were disposed of, and the unclean were kept from wandering too far. I arranged for the train to be sent out this morning empty but for myself, my weapon, and the purified tears. Before I left, I gave him a copy of my findings and made him promise to read it entirely, including my opinions on what might happen if this knowledge becomes widely known, and to make sure that Blackwood's Tears were being manufactured around the world before the day when that knowledge comes out. He nodded in silent agreement as the train pulled away. Shortly before noon, the train parked itself at a dead end in the middle of the desert. I readied my weapon and waited in a blind outside the train as the stench of the unclean began to fill the air. As I watched the abomination approach, I sighted its face through the remarkably sophisticated scope on the weapon and loosed the first round. The unclean screamed with a fury unimaginable. I almost dropped my gun and collapsed in agony. But as I watched through the scope, the creature lurched and seemed to grow a few feet smaller than it had been before. I fired another round, and a piece seemed to vanish from its head, but now it had sight of me, and it was coming in my direction. I loosed several more rounds before I was forced to run. Pieces of flesh seemed to be sloughing off the creature as it dragged itself in my direction, its screams piercing the air with a deafening madness. I ran blindly, turning occasionally to fire in its direction, changing magazines from time to time. Alas, I had been paying more attention to the creature behind me than the terrain in front of me, and I found myself boxed in. I turned to fire again, and to my horror I discovered the gun had jammed. The unclean was less than half the size it had been before. It dragged itself in my direction, slowed but still unrelenting as I furiously tried to clear the jam. It screamed as it raised itself up above me. Somehow, In its wounded state, the monster seemed more human than it had before. Across every inch of the giant's skin, I seemed to behold a different face, and each furious proclamation it made seemed to echo with hundreds of voices in fear and agony. I was still trying to clear the jam when it began to bear down on me, and I thought I was soon to join the souls that comprised that thing in their unceasing damnation. But when the titanic head was barely feet away from me, it stopped. The unclean held itself motionless above me. It could have moved in for the kill at any time, but instead it waited as I cleared the jam, and seconds later my weapon was ready to fire. I understood. The unclean was an amalgamation of cursed souls, eternal pain, and confusion, seeking a release that was forever denied to them. The thing before me wanted to die. I aimed my weapon, closed my eyes, and emptied the magazine into its faceless visage as it screamed a final time, and the scream was instantly cut short, echoing across the desert before dissipating entirely. When I opened my eyes, a scene of utter carnage lay before me. Of the unclean itself, there was no sign, but instead, hundreds of men and women and children, naked as the day they were born, lay sprawled across the desert plains, dead or dying. I walked among them and saw young and old, gasping for air in their final moments, for none of them lasted more than a few moments before expiring. Among the crowd I spotted a face I recognized, the soldier of the blessed militia who had been killed, so I thought at the time, in the attack that saved my life. As I looked at the dying man, his eyes met mine, and he spoke 2 words. Thank you. I made my way back west in the direction I had intended to flee in January, and boarded the train back to the city of angelic glory. The faster I can put this scene and these unfertile lands behind me, the better it shall be for my sanity. March 23rd, 1876. I returned through the mirror to London before dawn in the morning of this world, arriving back in my study just after noon London time. I was most thankful to find the gateway still worked. I had not expected to be away as long as I have been, and feared it might have ceased functioning, or the disc removed from the mirror. I immediately removed it from the mirror myself and set it on the ground, whereupon it rolled back to the mirror and attached itself. But having not been placed there by a human being, the mirror was only a looking glass, and the portal to that world and the horrors that populated it was, for now, sealed. I do not think I shall journey to that world again. The unclean were monstrous enough, but there is a certain irony in the fact that, as alien and terrifying as they were, the greatest evil to populate that land was man itself. For it was the leaders of men who must have created the unclean to begin with, and who continue to allow their existence in order to perpetuate their reign of terror. The gun and the blackwood's tears I have brought back with me shall likely prove of little use in this world, but I shall store them at my house in the country for now. For if the being that provided the tears to that earth ever visits our own, the compound may one day prove of great utility. I visited Mr. Belson again today at Bedlam. I told him of my journey to his land. What I had learned there I kept to myself, and that I had the means to return him there if he so desired it. He declined. Having been gone so long, and having vanished so suddenly, he would surely be under great suspicion if he returned, and would likely be put to the tears, a fate that I now wished on no man. I have promised to vouch for him with the jailers and earn his release. I told him that when and if he becomes a free man, there shall be a position available for him in my household staff, if he desires one. Deeds was very fascinated by my tale of my adventures in that parallel earth, and suggested I publish it. But who could believe such a fanciful story of worlds accessible through a looking glass and gigantic horrors? Perhaps I shall present it as fiction in one of the penny journals that have become so popular among the working class. For whether they regard it as true or not, I suppose it does make a most entertaining yarn.
Indeed. Okay. that was part 2 of this video. I hope y'all are having a fantastic 420. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you guys want me to react to an SCP, be sure to leave one in the comments below. I'll leave a link to, what was it I was listening to? I don't know. My brain ain't working, guys. SCP-610, and yeah, my brain. And I'll leave the video to the last video in the description. Sorry, guys, freaking YouTube notifications. But I hope y'all enjoyed. Peace and love to all of you.